Coming to you from North Central Ohio, we share with you Relevant Truth, a week-by-week venture into the Word of God, giving insight as to how it relates to our lives and that of our families. Sponsored by Bucyrus Church of the Nazarene, we join our pastor, Reverend Ray LaSalle, as he shares Relevant Truth.
Sinful man, there's an emptiness, a hole, a need, a desire. And mankind, fallen from grace, now born in sin, yet in the creation story, God created in the image of God and in his likeness. And did you notice in verse 31, when God got through, he said it's good. Now, your wife may not tell you that, but God said it's good. And the creation of man was not some kind of purple mountain's majesty and from sea to shining sea, but the apex of God's creation is humankind. The only thing that God ever created and said, this is in my own image, in my own likeness. That's he and she and we are made in God's own image. We're an original design of our Creator, a divine spark with an inward light in all of us that looks for the true light. Got that together? Here's my second affirmation. Though God's image can be blurred or marred, the good news is it can be restored through the power of Jesus Christ. Man may have fallen in the garden. Man may have been blurred by sin and marred by sin. But through God's image be blurred, and some of it through our own self-centeredness, our own disobedience. We live in a world of sinful hideousness and awful evil. And we look around and we see the way people live and we ask, is this the image of God? The image of God that's blurred? You know, it's easy for us to look around and point out everybody else's problems. Maybe we need to glance in the mirror for a moment and see if perhaps our life has become a little blurred too. We're created in God's own image, but the blurring of that image is sometimes our own fault, our self-making, our own self-loathing. And then we find that it can be restored by the power of Jesus Christ. I believe that's the essence of the gospel. The essence of the gospel, that Christ came to restore us back to the image of God, back to the original image of God. It's the essence. And though that image may be blurred in us often, it can be restored if we're willing to allow the divine potter to take the clay again and begin to mold and shape it into something useful. Even our own image can become blurred. Can I tell you a little story? I don't think I've ever told it in public before. As a young guy, I attended a parochial school. Fact of the matter, I was the youngest student that had ever stayed on the campus in the dormitory. It was 7th grade, 8th grade, and then on into high school. While attending that school, there was some mistreatment by some teachers. I had a principal that once stated that he didn't understand me. Well, nobody asked him to. I didn't understand him. I didn't dislike him, but I didn't want to be like him. Some people, I don't know if their shorts get pulled up too tight or somebody twisted their sock, but they just live in kind of a bind all the time, trying to be something they're really not. My problem is I got a little humor. Sometimes I wished I wasn't born with it. My mama called it an ornery streak in my theology. Mischievous, but I never got in trouble, never had any problems against my deportment. I got a straight A in deportment all the way through school. One of the students, an older guy, about everybody there was older, so that wasn't a problem. His name was Gene. Have you ever noticed there's some big guys that like to pick on little guys? They never lose when they do. Gene was way up in high school. I think he was a senior in high school. I'm 7th grade. We're in the dorm. Some of the guys were out in the hall, and we were talking about that time. Gene came up behind me and grabbed my arm and twisted it behind my back and shoved it up northward. That's that way. It was in a direction it should not go, behind your back. And it hurt. He said, say, Uncle. Well, I wouldn't have said aunt or uncle or anything else for his sake. And he twisted a little harder and finally got me off of one foot, and I'm standing on my tiptoes on the other, and he said, "Are you going to say uncle?" I said, "No, you're hurting my arm." And some of the other guys said, "Let him go, Gene. He's just a boy." I didn't like that part. And he twisted a little harder, and I got close enough to the door jamb that I put a foot against it with all of my might, shoved back, and it shoved us across the hall. It was a narrow hall, and he cracked his head on the other door frame. And when he did, he kind of loosened his grasp, and I jerked my arm out. It was hurting. I was trying to rub it. About that time, a hand spun me around, and the principal took a paddle to me and worked me over and worked me over, and he wouldn't quit till he got the tears flowing. Well, he said, "I guess you learned a lesson." And I looked up and I said, "Sir," through the crying, "what lesson was I supposed to learn?" Well, he said, "I hope you learned something. I've been wanting to do this for a long time." I said, what was wrong?" "My arm was being twisted. I was trying to get free." "Oh," I said, "I've been wanting to do this for a long time." Well, he should have been a happy camper. Some of the other students said it wasn't his fault. He was standing there and we were just talking, and Gene came up behind him and began to twist his arm and torment him. And he should have got the paddling that you just give the little guy. And so the principal, Mr. Smith, said, "Lean over," and tapped him on the bottom and laughed and headed up the hall. That don't sound like anything to you, but being humiliated in front of the other kids, I struggled with that. You talk about blurring your vision of a Christian school and Christianity and the whole process of a leader supposed to be kind. I struggled with it. Fact of the matter, I'll confess to you, I struggled with it for a number of years. I remember another occasion. At the school, you were to work 2 hours. It would help with tuition, and all students were required, and maybe as a part of their program of discipline, I don't know. But I've never disliked working. Fact of the matter, instead of working the 2 hours, if you worked another hour, you got 35 cents. That's big money. It wasn't even big money in those days, but it's more money than I would have gotten. And so there was a number of evenings I'd work past my 2 hours, and I'd get maybe 3 more hours in, and multiply the 3 by 35, and you come to the conclusion. And on Saturdays I'd work all day long. I did every restroom in the school but the girls' restroom and the women teachers' restroom. I did all the elementary classrooms. I did it because I enjoyed working. I like doing something. I like accomplishing. I like making a little money, if you don't mind my saying so. That particular Saturday, they were going to mop and clean all the floors, strip them down. That's taking the wax off, and then we were going to mop them clean, and then we would seal those tile floors, and following that, we would put wax on. Big job. I was given some classrooms, and I did those, and there were some others that needed done, and so I worked 8 hours that Saturday, 6 more than I would have had to work. And it was getting into the evening, and word spread, let's go to the gym and let's play basketball. They had a big gymnasium on the school grounds, and so we went and we're playing basketball. And about that time, the dean of women came in, and she had the president of the college and the high school and the grade school. She had him in tow. You could tell they were in a mood. And he said, "I want all of you guys to line up." So we did. All these guys that come to me and then back up. I was 7th grader. They were all high schoolers, except my brother Jim. And Dr. Hanson said, "All right, I understand some of you didn't do your work, and there's rooms that were not finished. And some of you didn't even clean, let alone strip the floors. I want to know who didn't do their chores." It was amazing. It was a Quaker meeting. Nobody said anything. Total silence. And he stormed along the line and back and forth, and "I want to know. Somebody better tell me something. We're going to deal with all of you." I love that. Somebody doesn't do something right and all of you is in trouble. Isn't that an amazing thing? What it is, it's a threat to get you to squeal. Back and forth. And finally, he came down the line and he came to the little guy. That was the guy standing next to the guy on my right. And the other guy on my left was the guy next to him. And he got in my face and he said, who didn't do their chores? I said, I couldn't tell you. He grabbed me by the shirt front and he said, you're going to tell me. Well, number one, I was so busy, I didn't know who did what. I was just slopping the floors and trying to strip them down, trying to dry one room while I'm working on another room, then going back and seal that room, and I'd worked all day. I said, I really don't know. He said, you know everything. Well, that was news. No use finishing school, I already knew it all. Those are the thoughts that go through my brain. You may not be wired that way, but I am, so I have to live with it. And he said to me, he said, you will tell. I said, I don't believe I'll tell. I worked 8 hours, sir. I went 6 hours past the 2 hours, and being it was a special day, I was glad to do it. We're just here to play basketball now. He said, you'll not touch the ball again. You will tell me who didn't do their job. I said, sir, Mom and Dad never allowed us to squeal at our house. And I'm not going to start it here. And boy, he grabbed me by the shirt front, dragged me across the gym, put me down on a bench, climbed on top with his knees and pinned me down and began to slap me and you're going to tell, and finally began to punch me. And something died on the inside of me that took a long time for it to ever come alive again. I loved the school, but I didn't love what had just taken place. There was a board meeting over it, and the board was called together. I suppose he was disciplined. It was a big issue on the campus. I never said a word to anybody. I know when he was leaving, a big old high school senior stepped in front of him and said, why don't you try it on a guy your size? And he didn't. And to make a long story short, I saw him a month later and caught him in the hall, and I stepped up to him and I said, Dr. Hanson, I want to apologize for my side, anything that I did wrong that caused this outburst. And he just glared at me, turned and walked off. And it was something else that I struggled with. Times when I'd wake up at night and couldn't go back to sleep. And I remember those two and what they'd done and how it had blurred my image of Christian schools and the church and the call of God on my life. And I wanted to hunt them up and tell them I'm a little bigger now. Let's have a little talk. And I realized this is a trick of the enemy to get me angry. This is not what God's called me to be. And I'd have to say, God, forgive me for getting all upset and bent out of shape. Would you put it under the blood again and kind of shove it to one side of my memory? I'm simply trying to say to you that not only can the things be blurred in our life, but the images can get blurred in our mind until we have wrong concepts, and we have to have God to try to help us to deal with those things. The good news is Jesus Christ came to restore what sin had blurred in our life, even the blurred images left in our minds. And I'm glad that we can come to the Lord and say, God, I give myself to you. I'm the clay. You're the potter. Form, shape me, melt me, mold me, make me, fill me, thrill me, and use me. And God, restore your image in me. Created in the image of God. We're an original design. No one else like us. God has designed us in our individual uniqueness. And when that uniqueness, or rather when that image becomes blurred, we can be restored through the power of Jesus Christ. There's one other affirmation that I have that I believe is important. And if it's true that you're created in the image of God, and I believe it is, and if it's true that we can become blurred because of sin, and it was, and it can be, and we can only be restored by Jesus Christ and his power, then it's also true that we must train ourselves to see God's image in other people. I hope you're listening right now. I think it's one of the biggest issues that we struggle in our life. Think of it like this, how different it would be for us in living our lives with the knowledge that every person that we come into contact with is made in the image of God just as we are. How that would change the way that we go about our business, and how that would change the way that we have an outlook on life, and how it would change our relationships with other people. Those hands that we shake, those shoulders that we hug, everybody, every friend, every enemy, every opponent, every individual that bugs us, all those people, what if we begin to recognize that they too are created in the image of God? And if we would train ourselves to see the image of God in other people. We're all created in the image of God. And the blur is restored by the power of Jesus Christ. It means that I can begin to see the image of God somehow, some way in every person, and it would change everything, and it would change our world. I wonder if that could be the reason we've drifted so far from the original creation. Because with the image of God so blurred in our time and in our world, we've forgotten that God intended that from the very beginning that every human being was created in his image and after his likeness. It means that every other human being needs love and grace, mercy. And just like we are being molded and shaped by God, so every other individual is somewhere along in the process of God trying to find them, God trying to deal with them, God trying to get their attention, God trying to shape their life, God trying to turn them around, God trying to stir their direction. They may be at a different place in the journey, but how different it would be if we would train ourselves to see the image of God in others. What power it would unleash in everyone's life. It would treat them like the child of God they are. They may not be living up to where they ought to be, but maybe we are not living up to all that we know. Yet to see every person in the image of God. Dr. Fred Chaddick, I don't know if you've read after him, maybe some of you have heard him, I don't know. He happened to be, for many, many years, a professor of homiletics at Emory University. That's the science of preaching, homiletics. Learning how to develop a sermon and learning how to deliver the message. Professor of homiletics, Emory University. He taught homiletics for many years, and Dr. Chaddick, in his own right, was a very powerful preacher. He told about a radical experience that he'd had in his life that so changed him. He was from the Smoky Mountains down in Tennessee. His wife was also from the Smokies. They grew up, he said, back in the hollers and way back in the hills, not even near any major roads. And somehow he met this mountain girl and fell in love, and they were married, and he felt the call of God on his life. And when he left high school and was married and got enough money that he could get a car, they made their way out of those hills and hollers and mountains of the Smokies. And he attended Southern Methodist University. From there, he made his way out to California and got many postgraduate works and under his belt in academics and preaching and teaching and other things. He told how it had been a long, long, long time, some years since they'd been back in the Smokies. And during the summer, they made their way back to the Smokies to see family that they hadn't seen in years and to reminisce. They'd pull in through those hills and hollers and into the Smokies and pulled into a little town in the valley. They were coming down Main Street and they saw a sign that said cafe, one of those quintessential cafes. Parked the car and got out and walked up the sidewalk and into the cafe, and it was one of those cafes. Had tablecloths, people milling around, people talking, everybody seeming to know everybody, and the waitress was calling people by name, and you seated yourself, and they found a little table where they could kind of look people over in the restaurant. The waitress came and brought him some water and a cup of coffee and took their order. One of those coffee-stained menus, no wine lists, 3 vegetables, couple meats to choose from, and coffee. And said as they sat there waiting for their order to come, they noticed a tall gentleman kind of drifting his way through the restaurant from table to table, talking with people, laughing with people, visiting with people. And as he's making his way around the restaurant, he came over to their table and said, welcome, welcome to town. I don't believe you're from here. And they said, no. Well, he said, I hope you're enjoying the food. I see they just brought it to your table, and I noticed that you prayed over it, and I hope you have a great day and maybe come back to our town. Said, by the way, where are you from? And they told him. He said, well, what is it that you people do? Well, he said, I'm a homiletics teacher, professor at Emory University. And the tall, stately, white-headed man said, well, that means you must be a preacher. Well, he said, yes, I'm a preacher too. He said, let me tell you a story. Now everybody's got a story. They could have said, you know, we'd just kind of like to enjoy our meal on vacation, you know, but they didn't. He pulled the empty chair out, turned it around, straddled the chair, put his arms up on the back of the chair. He said, you see that church right outside the window, right up the street there on the hill? A little white church with a steeple? They said, yes. He said, I grew up right around behind that church, right up the block. He said, as a boy growing up in this town, I always had this cloud that hung over my head. And Dr. Chaddick said, a cloud? Yes. He said, a dark cloud. He said, you see, my mother had me out of wedlock. I'm an illegitimate child. Mother never married. Everybody in town knew who my mother was. Everybody knew the story of the little boy, Benny, that didn't know who his dad was. Born out of wedlock. Everybody knew. He said, I didn't have many friends. I didn't talk to many people. I just went to school and got out as quickly as I could because kids would taunt me. But said there was one thing Mother wanted. She wanted her boy to be in church. And said, although Mother never attended church herself because she didn't feel welcome, she would send me around the block and up the street and to that little white church. And said, I'd try to get there just as service is beginning, and I would slip up the stairs and sit in the balcony all by myself every Sunday morning. And as they would have the crowd to stand and sing the final closing hymn, I would make my way down those stairs and slip out the front door and make my way home. He said, when I was 10 years of age, he said, I made my way up the stairs and sat down on the balcony, and when it came time for the speaker to preach, I looked around for the old pastor, but he wasn't there. And they introduced this new guy as the new pastor. He said, I wondered, where did the old one go? And he said the new one stepped up and said he was pretty good. I think the people are going to like him. And said he preached this message, and when he came to a conclusion and asked for the final song, he did something different than the old pastor. He made a beeline as fast as he could down the aisle and back to the back door, standing there waiting to shake hands. He thought, I'm in trouble. I can't get out of here. I won't be able to get past the pastor. So he said, I huddled in the shadows of the balcony and waited until everybody had left. Silently began to make my way down those stairs, leaning against the wall. And I came around the corner to go right through the little vestibule, and suddenly the hand of the pastor slipped out and grabbed me by the arm and spun me around and said, whose boy are you? And he said, everything drained out of me. He said, I just felt a sinking sensation. Whose boy are you? Oh, he said, I know whose boy you are. I recognize you. Why, he said, I see the resemblance. Why, you're the Son of the living God, and there's something special about you, son. He said to that Dr. Chaddock, and his wife said, you know, nobody had ever said anything to me like that before. Nobody had ever seemed to think that it was anything special. He said, it changed my world. It turned my life around, and no longer did I have to go through the town with my head hung down. I got to church early. I didn't sit on the balcony anymore. I sat out and among the crowd. I was special. I was made in the image of God, and he saw the resemblance. He said, I set out to serve God and to live for God, and I wasn't ashamed in the town anymore. He said, I hope you have a great day. Enjoy your meal. Safe travels to you. God bless. Wound his way through the tables and out the front door, and the doorbell clung as the door closed. When the waitress came over to refill their coffee cup, Dr. Chaddock said to the waitress, who was that man? Oh, that's Ben Hooper. Everybody knows him well. He said, I could tell he knew everybody. But said, who's Ben Hooper? Oh, said, he was the governor of the great state of Tennessee. Fact of the matter, for 2 terms. Everybody loved Ben Hooper. And said when he left office, he came back to our town, and he likes to come in and shoot the breeze with everybody. He loves everybody, and everybody loves Ben Hooper. And he said, as I sat there, suddenly I remembered something I'd heard my dad say when I was a boy. He said, Dad had said it's a shame that an illegitimate son was elected to become the governor of Tennessee and to sit in the governor's office. It's a shame. And he said, as I got up and paid the bill, and we slipped out the front door and walked the sidewalk to the car and climbed inside, he said, I sat there for a minute, and everything began to change in my brain. Chaddock said that day, when I got into the car, he said, I made it my life's mission for the rest of my ministry not to see people as other people saw them, but to see them as God says they are, created in God's image, after God's likeness, an original design by the Creator. It can become blurred from time to time. Things can happen that maybe bring some shame in the minds of some, but it can be restored by the power of Jesus Christ. And when we begin to see others in the image of God as God sees them, everything changes. As I stand here this morning, can I tell you, I recognize you. I know who you are. You're a child of God. You're made in the image of God. And when we walk out of the building this morning, you have the ability, you have the power to begin to see others. They may not be where they ought to be. You can see them for what God wants them to become, but you remember they've got a stamp of God on them. No matter how far they run, they were made in His image. It may be blurred, it may be marred, but don't look down on them anymore. See them as a potential. Treat them as a creation that God Himself is working on, shaping, molding, melding into usefulness. Father,
You've been listening to Relevant Truth, one of the many ministries of Bucyrus Church of the Nazarene with Reverend Ray LaSalle. Join us at one of our regular service times, 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. on Sundays. You can also find us on the web at bucyrusnazarene.org. We're located just south of Bucyrus, Ohio on State Route 4. BNC, a place for you.